Hello, today we will be discussing on the meaning, components and characteristics of attitude, formation of attitudes and influence of attitudes on behavior. The basic objectives of this topic are to know the meaning and definitions of attitude, to understand the main components of attitude, to identify and understand the salient characteristics of attitude, to know how attitudes are formed, and to understand the influence of attitude on behavior. First, let us explore what the term attitude refers to. We live in society and interact with other individuals. We possess knowledge about others. Accordingly, we behave with others with certain feeling. Taking all these three, knowledge, feeling and behavior, a construct is developed and termed as attitude. A construct is a non-observable attribute or concept created by mental synthesis. Attitude is present in all individuals, which determines our orientation to other individuals, objects or practices in the society. When we say we like something or someone, or when we say we don't like someone or something, we are expressing our attitude towards individuals, objects, ideas or issues. The study of attitude is one of the core areas of social psychology. Considering its importance, Allport in 1935 rightly said that attitude is the most distinctive and indispensable concept in contemporary psychology. Attitude refers to a state of readiness based on past experiences which guide, bias, or otherwise influence our behavior. An attitude is defined as a relatively enduring organization of beliefs, feelings, and behavioral tendencies towards socially significant objects, groups, events, or symbols. Attitude is also defined as a predisposition involving beliefs, feeling, and disposition to act towards the object, other individuals, ideas, or issues. Fishbein and Adzen in 1975 defined attitude as a learned predisposition to respond in a consistently favorable or unfavorable manner with respect to a given object. Campbell in 1980 linked attitude with the degree of consistency in a person's response to a situation or subject. Several definitions of attitude have evolved across time, and recently more emphasis has been placed on evaluation. The most conventional contemporary definition of attitude has been given by Eagly and Chaikin in 1993. According to them, an attitude is a psychological tendency that is expressed by evaluating a particular entity with some degree of favor or disfavor. Hence, attitudes are commonly viewed as the summary evaluation of a psychological object, captured in such attribute dimensions ranging from positive to negative. When we talk about positive and negative attribute dimension, we indicate good or bad, harmful or beneficial, liking or disliking, happy or sad. The evaluation emphasizes upon the complex combination of the three principal components of attitude, such as knowledge, feeling, and behavior. Let us take a look at the diagrammatic representation of attitude components. As just mentioned, attitudes possess three main components or aspects such as knowledge or cognition, feeling or affect, and behavior. First, the cognitive component is made up of the beliefs of an individual about the object, other individuals, ideas, or issues of the attitude. Beliefs are pieces of information available about the object towards which attitudes form. Beliefs play a vital role in explaining things to others. We hold beliefs about our religion, our family, and about other objects. Second, the affective component refers to our feeling towards the object of the attitude. Example, feeling happy for a baby. Rosenberg in 1956 introduced the concept attitudinal affect, and it became popular to distinguish the affective components of attitudes from its cognitive and behavioral counterparts. Affect has been defined as an evaluation or appraisal of an object, person, or event as good or bad, favorable or unfavorable, desirable or undesirable. As attitudes are themselves defined as evaluations, this broad definition of affect leads to several conceptual problems. As a result, modern attitude theories often use a narrower definition of affect as a momentary pleasant or unpleasant state, which goes parallel with emotions and moods. Third, the behavioral component consists of a predisposition or tendency to respond in a certain way to the object of the attitude. If one possesses a positive attitude about someone, his or her actual behavior would be favorable and vice versa. Generally, behavior has been used to describe overt actions and responses to the attitude object. These three components, cognitive, affective, and behavioral, are not separate entities. Rather, they all influence each other. If any one of the components changes, its impact is observed in others as well as in the entire attitude structure. Because of the individual influence and collective impact, attitude is dynamic as well as very complex. The contemporary view holds that an attitude is an entity distinguishable from the classes of cognition, affect, and behavior. An attitude, therefore, does not consist of these elements, but is instead a general evaluative summary of the information derived from these bases. Considering the several definitions of attitude, 9 main characteristics of attitude are identified. Attitudes are learned. Attitudes are not instinctive, rather they are learned. Hence, learning plays an important role in the formation of attitude. An individual's attitudes are based on their past experience, exposure, and knowledge about the attitude objects. Attitudes are relatively stable. Attitudes are persistent across time and situation. Therefore, they are less likely to change. Once the individual develops an attitude, any information opposing it is not attended to easily by the individual. As a result, the individual is not readily affected by the opposite information and holds the same attitude for a relatively long period. Attitudes are dispositional. Attitudes are basically internal disposition. These are the characteristics of an individual which differ in their strength from one another depending on the process of socialization of the individual. Attitude possesses dimensions. Attitude of an individual has two parts, either positive or negative. The individual either likes an object or dislikes it. Thus, very often the range of attitude varies from strongly positive to strongly negative. Sometimes attitudes are also ambivalent, both positive and negative feelings towards an object. Attitude helps to establish our identity. Each individual possesses attitude, which is a complex and unique integration of knowledge, feeling, and behavior in a different way with a different intensity. This makes the individual unique from others. Attitude influences behavior and vice versa. The person holding an attitude demonstrates behavior that is consistent and compatible with the attitude. The relationship between attitude and behavior can be influenced by factors including qualities of the behavior, person, situation in which the behavior is exhibited, and the attitude itself. Attitude influences and guides our thought. Attitude can be implicit or explicit. Implicit attitudes are those which are uncontrollable and potentially not consciously accessible. Explicit attitudes are conscious and easy to report. According to Greenwald and Banerjee, 1995, implicit attitudes are introspectively unidentified or inaccurately identified traces of past experience that mediate favorable or unfavorable feeling, thought, or action toward social objects. Goronsky, Hoffman, and Wilbur in 2006 had proposed 3 aspects of implicit attitudes which are measured through current indirect measures. These are source awareness, people's awareness of the origin of a particular attitude; content awareness, people's awareness of the attitude itself rather than simply its origin; and impact awareness, the influence this attitude has on other psychological processes. That is, one may have awareness of both the attitude and its source, but the attitude may still have influences on thought or behavior beyond one's awareness. Attitudes possess structure. The definitions of attitude give rise to the structure of attitudes. Considering several theories, the structure of an attitude can be represented as an object evaluation association and the knowledge structures linked to it. Researchers have identified 2 general types of attitude structure, such as intra-attitudinal structure and inter-attitudinal structure. Intra-attitudinal structure refers to the structure of a single attitude, whereas inter-attitudinal structure refers to structures involving more than one attitude, also referred to as attitude systems or sometimes belief systems. Generally, intra-attitudinal is used when a single object is considered, and inter-attitudinal when 2 or more objects are involved. Attitudes serve motivational functions. Attitudes serve primarily 4 motivational functions, such as ego defense, value expressive, instrumental, and knowledge functions. Attitudes with ego defense function protect us from experiencing negative feelings about ourselves as we project negative feelings onto others. Value expressive functions of attitudes show us the ways in which we express those things that are important to us. Instrumental function emphasizes that attitudes may be adopted and expressed because they enable us to gain social acceptance or avoid social disapproval. Knowledge functions of attitudes help us to organize our social world along evaluative dimensions and allow us to make predictions. So, how do attitudes develop? The formation of attitude is a continuous process. This takes place in the individual's life from birth through the child rearing practices and the entire socialization process. Therefore, learning plays a significant role. The principles of classical conditioning, operant conditioning, and social learning are primarily responsible for the formation of attitude. In addition to these, mere exposure effect is also responsible for the formation of attitudes. Let us now examine each of these principles. Classical conditioning. The main principle of classical conditioning is the association between unconditioned stimulus with a neutral or conditioned stimulus. When we refer to Pavlov's original experiment on classical conditioning, the dog developed a positive attitude towards the sound of the bell, which was the neutral stimulus, when the bell was associated with the positive attitude of the dog towards food, which was the unconditioned stimulus, after repeated presentation. The same principle works when a child interacts with the mother and other individuals in society. Many researchers support this technique. The individual is exposed to the name of an attitude object together with an accompanying positive or negative stimulus and develops attitude accordingly. Sometimes the stimulus is a direct, pleasant or unpleasant experience. For instance, the presence or absence of a stimulus, pain. And sometimes it is simply a word that has positive or negative association. For example, good or bad. The stimuli elicit positive or negative affective responses basing upon the situation, which in turn become associated in memory with the attitude object. Whenever the same attitude object is presented, the associated positive or negative affective response is recalled and experienced by association. Operant conditioning. Attitudes are formed in certain cases because of the principles of Skinner's operant conditioning or instrumental conditioning. Operant conditioning is a method of learning where an association is made between a behavior and a consequence for that behavior, which is reinforcement or punishment. Skinner in 1953 used the term operant to refer to any active behavior that operates upon the environment to generate consequences. 4 types of learning processes occur in operant conditioning, such as positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment, and negative punishment. Positive reinforcement occurs when the likelihood of a desired behavior increases as a result of the occurrence of a pleasant stimulus after the behavior. For example, when the mother praises the child for singing a song, the child develops a more positive attitude towards singing. Negative reinforcement, on the other hand, occurs when the likelihood of a desired behavior increases as the result of the removal of the unpleasant stimulus after the behavior. For instance, when you feel upset, to avoid such a mood, you start reading a book and therefore you develop positive attitude towards reading books. In contrast to reinforcement, positive punishment or punishment by application occurs when the likelihood of an undesired behavior decreases as the result of the onset of unpleasant stimulus after the behavior. For example, a child's absenteeism in school decreases because of the remarks made by the teacher. In this case, negative attitude may develop towards absenteeism. Negative punishment or punishment by removal occurs when the likelihood of an undesired behavior decreases as the result of the removal of the pleasant stimulus after the behavior. For instance, the frequency of a student being late for class decreases as a result of losing the chance of getting more marks. Here, the child may develop negative attitudes towards being late for class. The principles are presented in the following figure. Social learning. Attitude is also formed because of the principles of social learning or observation learning propounded by Albert Bandura. Social learning takes place when individuals watch the actions of others, who are referred to as model, and note the reinforcements they receive for their behaviors. Here, the reinforcement is called vicarious reinforcement, which is a form of reinforcement that occurs when someone watches a model being rewarded or punished. Social learning helps form new attitudes, as well as increases or decreases the frequency and intensity of the already formed attitudes. According to the principles of social learning, individuals are more likely to imitate behaviors if they have observed others being rewarded for performing those behaviors. In other cases, they are less likely to imitate behaviors if they have observed others being punished for the same. Mere exposure effect. Besides the three main principles of attitude formation we have just seen, mere exposure to the attitude object also is responsible for the formation of attitude. Zhang in 1968 proposed that mere repeated exposure of the individual to a stimulus is a sufficient condition for the enhancement of his attitude towards it. This means that just seeing something over and over is enough to make him or her like it more. Also, if the individual initially dislikes something, repeated exposure will not make the individual like it more. We will now move on to understand the influence of attitude on behavior. Researchers found weak relations between attitudes and behavior until the 1960s. Fishbein and Adzen in 1975 pointed out that past research often failed to measure a behavior that directly corresponded to the attitude being measured. The problem was that the measured behavior was very specific, whereas the attitude object was much more general. Findings of later studies show that attitudes and actions are very closely related and are often consistent because they influence each other in both superficial and deliberate ways. How actions influence attitudes depends on the level of processing. People can make simple action to attitude inferences, usually through self-perception processes, or can make deeper considerations of the implications of their actions through cognitive dissonance processes. Theory of reasoned action, later on termed as theory of planned behavior, given by Adzen and Fishbein in 1980, explains the association between attitude and behavior. The theory of reasoned action suggests that the decision to engage in a particular behavior is a result of a rational process in which behavioral options are considered, consequences or outcomes of each are evaluated, and a decision is reached whether to act or not to act. That decision is then reflected in behavioral intentions which strongly influence overt behavior. Later on, a refined version of this theory, that is, the theory of planned behavior, emphasized that in addition to attitudes towards a given behavior and subjective norms about it, individuals also consider their ability to perform the behavior. Sometimes our attitudes direct our behavior, which is explained by the attitude to behavior process model by Fazio and Roscoe-Evolson in 1994. This model focuses on the influence of attitudes and stored knowledge of what is appropriate in a given situation on an individual's definition of the present situation. This definition in turn influences overt behavior. According to this model, events trigger our attitudes and at the same time the appropriate norms for how people should or typically do behave in a given situation. Thus, attitudes are an important factor in shaping our overt behavior. Attitudes can bias people's perception of attitude objects because they focus attention on the consistent characteristics of an object. This bias process increases the likelihood that people's behavior will be consistent with their attitude in a direct way. people respond to the object qualities most salient to them and behave in attitude-consistent ways. Attitudes can also influence behavior in more considered ways by prompting intentions which trigger plans to act in certain ways. There are certain moderating variables or factors acting on the relation between attitudes and behavior that determine whether the relation between attitudes and behavior is relatively strong or weak. Those factors include qualities of the behavior, qualities of the person, qualities of the situation in which the behavior is exhibited, and qualities of the attitude itself. Thus, the formation of attitude gives an identity to the individual to live in society. The stability of attitude is an important issue. This creates a question in mind: can attitude be changed? Attitudes can be altered, but in certain conditions and through a gradual process. However, there seems to be a predisposition to maintain the attitude that one already possesses. The reasons for the stability of attitude are multidimensional. People generally stay in the same socio-cultural environment. They stay with their family, friends, co-workers, neighbors, surroundings and social situations which are the same for a consistent period of time, maybe for the entire lifetime even. Therefore, attitude stability is more prominent than attitude change.